Welcome. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to introduce to you four fantastic individuals in the business marketing space. My name is Sandy Matson, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Communications at Prisma. Many of you probably know us as Prisma Graphic, and we've recently rebranded to simply Prisma to really reflect how our brand has evolved in the marketplace. We're talking about trends today, and Prisma's story really relates to trends. Many years ago, we noticed that there was a trend happening where printing, marketing, and technology were really evolving together. So we created a software product, and now today I'm glad to say that there are 41,000 users who use this software product around the world. Prisma has really been a supporter of these types of events in the business-to-business space, so we're thrilled to be the sponsor today. Without further ado, I will introduce the panel. First, we have Steve Legouri. Did I say that correctly? Wonderful. Steve is the Executive Director of Global Innovation and New Models at GE. Steve leads GE's efforts to build breakthrough customer offerings in new growth areas for the company, including the industrial internet, applying startup and entrepreneurial practices, and advanced manufacturing. Steve is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University Business School and serves as a global vice chairman of the BMA. Next, we have George Stenitzer, Vice President of Communications at Tel Labs. Since 2000, George has led Tel Labs' global corporate and marketing communications team, responsible for all communications with customers, investors, employees, media, and industry analysts in 90 countries. George is ranked among the best marketers in 2013 and 2012 by B2B magazine, and previously held leadership roles within R.R. Donnelley, Ameritech, and SBC Communications. George serves on the BMA National Board as Executive Vice President. Next, Howard Sherman is President and CEO of Doremus. Howard has spent his career in creatively driven marketing communications companies over the past 20 years. In this capacity, he has been practitioner, visionary, leader, and the cultural core of the organizations in which he led. Today, Howard has responsibilities for the worldwide network of Doremus, overseeing offices in New York, San Francisco, London, Hong Kong, Beijing, and Frankfurt. His single most important goal is to assure that the global Doremus offering remains relevant in an ever-changing global business environment. And finally, Carla Johnson is our panel moderator today. She's president of Type A Communications, and as president, Carla helps companies tell better stories in order to build stronger brand awareness, create employee and customer engagement, align marketing with sales, and ultimately generate top-line revenue. Carla is a consultant and writer for the Content Marketing Institute, an instructor for the Online Marketing Institute, and a contributing author.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Scott. For me, it was really exciting to hear the topic of this panel because I think over the past few years, there has been more and more that we hear about this alignment between sales and marketing. So I guess, first of all, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. This is such a hot topic, and I hear that for 2014, this is the topic. So it couldn't be more timely to kick this off in January than to hear the input from these individuals because I think they have a lot of really great things to share that we can all learn from. And so I want to start off with a question for all of them because one of the statistics I hear is about the cost of this alignment between sales and marketing. Serious Decisions puts it at about 24% revenue difference between companies who do have sales and marketing aligned and those of their peers who don't. So it's a statistic that has been around for a couple of years, but why is it that you think now this is really resonating and that people are really waking up and paying attention to this? So Steve, you want to kick us off?
I can do that. Hi everybody, great to be here. A long journey to get here, but I'm glad I finally made it. Which is a nice change. So just maybe some quick background, because we obviously have some great colleagues up here. I think that this cost of misalignment is it's probably always been there, but I think it's more acute now because I think, quite frankly, we're probably more disconnected now. Because I think there's more being changed in the world. The stuff that we, think about whatever company you are, whether you're a provider to folks like us or you're a manufacturer of clients like I am, GE. The nature of what you sell today versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago, it's got to be radically different. I mean, what your physical product or services has probably changed a lot, right? The nature of, oh, by the way, how you sell has changed, okay? How many of you took a course in LinkedIn, in school? Okay, I mean, so, all that stuff, social media, et cetera. So the products and services that clients want to sell have changed. The way that you go access the market to sell them has changed. And I just think that the disconnections have gotten, because it's gotten more complex. It's not like anyone said, oh, sales and marketing are not going to cooperate. But I just think the nature of the world has changed over such a time of rapid technology and innovation that old processes, and the sales department does this and the marketing department does that, they haven't caught up with the reality of where the world is going. That's a good challenge for us.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here and not in the snow in Chicago. Thanks for the good weather. You did a good job for us. I think this is bigger than just the sales and marketing problem. I know in our company I see alignment also being a struggle between R&D and sales. Is sales bringing back the right inputs that the customers are describing? What are their problems? What are their aspirations for their future solutions? Is that getting built in time and into the market in time? And then marketing is in the mix as well. So I see it partly as a bigger problem. And mainly because the buying process has changed. The seller now isn't in control of the buying process the way that they used to be. It used to be a salesperson would come in and educate you and would teach you about what are the problems that you have with your solution. What do you need to do next? And you would write an RFP or an RFQ based on what you've been taught. Now you go teach yourself. You're going to Google it, you're going to look at all the competitors, you're going to look at the associations. And so I think that the alignment hurts more because sales isn't in control of the front end of the process. And that's a scary thing to them. It would scare me if I were in sales.
Great. And, I'd like to add, I think both Steve raised great points. And I'd like to break it down into two parts. Because the first part of the question is, why is it important? And there's something called job security. And I say that half jokingly, but, I think we live in a world of accountability at a level that we never have before, whether you're on the agency side or on the client side. And, for certainly in my experience, the idea of not being aligned with, sales and marketing is really not really an option. And, Steve's point earlier about complexity in the marketplace of how products are developed and how they're sold and how they're bought is absolutely true. But with that comes great opportunity to actually create connectivity and engagement between the manufacturers and sellers of products and services, as well as the buyers of those products and services. So whether it's through social mechanisms or it's through, content development, which I think is kind of language that needs to evolve, and it needs to evolve with more about value exchange as opposed to content development. I think there's a real mindset that needs to change. It's less about selling and developing opportunities for engagement between two parties that have something that each other need, and building trust through that engagement in order to build a relationship where you actually have permission to get into a transaction.
I think your point about the relationships is really important. And so the next question I have starts with that relationship between sales and marketing. So I have a question for everybody here first, a couple of questions. How many people in the room here have been on a sales call with a sales team member? Raise your hand. I have to say that's the largest number I think I've ever seen when I've asked that question. Now on the flip side, how many of you marketers have ever had a salesperson come and sit in your office and say, help me understand what you do? I think that's still probably a higher number than I see usually. And so I think there's something to be said about that relationship between sales and marketing and really understanding what each other's role and responsibility is. So if you think about it, it's like marketing's from Mars and sales is from Venus. So you have to learn to understand each other's point of view. So George, maybe you want to talk a little bit about how do you get marketing and sales to understand each other's point of view, and what actually do you do to build that bridge and get that understandability?
Well, we use a couple tools that help us get aligned. The first is a one-page plan. And the one-page plan has 4 ingredients. The top ingredient is objectives. What does the company need to achieve? The second ingredient is goals. How are you going to measure whether the company achieved them fully, yes or no? The third component is strategies. Here are the things we in marketing are going to do for you in sales. Are these the right things? And the last is finally tactics, or excuse me, metrics. And the metrics measure the success of the strategy. So we have 2 qualitative sets of goals and 2 quantitative sets of goals. And we sit and just grind through, because all they can pay attention to is one piece of paper at a time. We grind through that plan. This is what we're going to do for you this year. Is this right? And we do that with the regional vice presidents. We do that with our partners and with other entities within sales. The second thing that we do is align around the messaging. And that takes a broader group. That takes some people from R&D, some of the engineers who are designing the product, sitting in the room with the guys from sales and with us from marketing to frame up what's the message, so that the message is actually co-created. The sales team knows a lot of things that we need to know. They know the customer's exact language. They know the worries, the needs, what keeps them up at night. And we want to frame the message in a way that it's going to go down well with the customer. That's how we do it.
Yeah, I'd like to share, maybe just share some thoughts. It was great to see the ratio of folks that have gotten on a sales call versus folks that have had salespeople visit them. I grew up in the same world. I grew up in marketing, and I go on sales calls, and every so often you like scratch your heads out. How come I'm going out with the sales folks coming in to see me? What I kind of concluded along the way, that I hope you concluded too, is marketing has to extend the olive branch to sales. So it's not like it's a war. You just don't understand each other. Really, I like that in Mars versus Venus comparison. You just don't understand. And if you don't believe it, I don't know. You probably don't belong in this profession. I have a huge amount of respect for our sales team. I wouldn't trade jobs with them for all the whatever, because I love what I do, and I love what I do intellectually. By the way, they love what they do. So maybe this is more of a philosophical one, but I think part of what we've got to understand is we're charged with the strategy connecting into, okay, what's the value prop for the customer? What are you trying to solve for? What are you trying to do? The sales force is charged with what? Selling, okay? Closing the deal, bringing in the revenue. If they don't bring in revenue, I don't care what business you're in, none of us have a job. So it's like, everything good starts with the customer, but if you don't obviously close the sales, you can't do this. This is, maybe without getting into specifics, which we can do more of, I always feel that it's our responsibility to say, we can help the situation. Part of it is you need to understand the sales force, and then part of it is to come back and figure out, okay, what do we need to map out? What are the gaps?
Yeah, I actually, I think Steve just said stuff before. I think the mindset of a marketer is, we kind of wake up, we come out of the womb and we're strategists, we want to know about customers, and we want to know about markets, and we think strategically about new channels and how can we leverage new channels and all that good stuff. And, I'm a marketing guy, my brother's a sales guy, and he thinks transactional. And his mind says transaction. And how can I convince the person on the other side of the table that what I have is something else? And we have endless conversations about those differences in mindset. And as an agency guy, it's kind of interesting. One of the things, to digress a little bit, this has been such an important topic for so long. Doreen started out as a financial services agency with a B2B agency, and a few years ago we said, there's actually a third space out there that nobody's tapping into. And that's the space of, rather than focusing in on the marketing of the brand, what we need to do is focus in on the business of the brand. And by that we mean understand what are the drivers of our clients' businesses, who are the stakeholders that are most important to them, and then how can communication strategies effectively help engage those different stakeholders in businesses. So there's a motto on the wall, which is outcomes, not ads, and all that good stuff. The only reason I share that with you is, I think from our perspective as an agency, the clear understanding that at the end of the day, if the work we're doing is not helping drive sales results, we're going to have a short relationship with them. Because that client has an obligation to demonstrate ROI on their investment in marketing. And I think we have a historic dichotomy between brand marketing being at the highest level and not being able to quite see what that does and drive people through the funnel, whether it's on funnel reports or convoluted, conclusive marketing sales cycles, right? But, you really have to think holistically about the role of overarching brand strategy, positioning, how does that apply in each of the customer segments, and how do you develop programs, investment programs, engagement programs that actually allow for a transaction to occur.
If I could just build on that. I mean, how many of you have had a salesperson come up and converse on like for an ad campaign? Please go spend more money on advertising, whatever. I mean, how is it accepted? And I have too. But it's rare. So when we cover the spectrum of strategy from building brand awareness to helping to close a transaction, there's obviously many points in there of different value at different times. And I don't think the sales force is necessarily thinking about that during the heat of the battle when I need a lead, I need to close, I need to get this done. Having said that, getting that understanding overall is something that we've got to stand up for, otherwise it doesn't.
But I think that's a good segue, Stevie, to our next question, which is about a lot of times the things that we produce as marketers focus on. If you go to a funnel example, the top of the funnel is brand awareness. It's a lot of the fun things that marketers like to do, and then it's support to help sales actually close the sale. And there's this big barren wasteland in between. Is that still what you're seeing? And if so, what needs to change from a marketer's perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a short answer to that, which is if there's a big barren space between those two things, they're cooked, and there can't be any more. And I think it's incumbent upon the marketers to think about the business problem that they're trying to solve, and think about all the tools that are available to them, and start working with the different types of enterprises that can help drive both lead gen and lead demand, and actually demonstrate how they can help the sales organization identify real customers and real engagement.
I would look at this through the eyes of the buyer. I think that's the most important change, really, that's going on in B2B marketing right now. Sales isn't driving, the buyer is driving. And so you can't leap from brand awareness to sales. I mean, I put up charts many times to my boss, and he goes, yeah, I see there's a 30% increase in awareness or buying into that brand position, but I don't see the money. And it's not a direct connect. There is a lot of stuff that happens in between. And so, we know the buyer is going out there, first of all, trying to identify, do they have a problem? The first thing we try to do is shake up the buyer's sense of the status quo. A lot of times the buyer has a problem, isn't aware that there's a different kind of solution they could do. And they could be hero. They could save a lot of money. They could have a lot less downtime. There's real opportunity for them, but you've got to make them aware of that. And it takes thought-leading content, thought-provoking content, to kind of break them out of that status quo mentality. And we put that out, in all forms of communications. But if you actually want to see the detailed investigative studies, you have to go to sales. So we drive you to sales. The second job that we have to do is differentiate our solution from the other ones. And be really clear about why ours is different. This is why you might have calculators, ROI calculators, tools like that you give to the buyer so they can do their own work on differentiation. The next thing you've got to do is reduce the risk of it. Okay, they've spent all this time on the internet researching this thing that could make or break their career. They have a lot at risk here as buyers, especially with big multi-million-dollar buys, which is what most of Telex's business is. And how do we convince them that there's less risk, that it's okay to go with us? The most convincing thing is put a video of a customer in front of them who said, I have this problem, this is what we did, this is how it worked for me. Let the customer convince the customer. But I think you can't make that leap over the Grand Canyon between brand awareness and lead generation. There's steps in between that are really important.
Speaking of like the dearth in the middle, I was just literally sitting in a review yesterday of a healthcare product we rolled out at the show called RSNA in November. Anyway, what it is called Centricity 360. So get your head wrapped around this. You get a three-dimensional picture of your heart beating or any other organ beating. It goes up through the cloud, and then it's reviewed by an expert, wherever that expert might be in the world, to come back with the diagnosis that you need. Oh, by the way, soon big data will be telling the doctor, look here, look here, look here, look here, based upon thousands of these things in the database. So where you go into a multi-million-dollar purchase, how do you build that chain? How do you get the engineers involved? How do you get the culture? How do you, before you even sit down with the sales force, who's sitting down with the customer saying, by the way, you didn't know you needed this, but you really needed it. And by the way, the price tag's like $2.5 million. So I think to the death of the funnel, that's a great thing that Howard brought up. Is I mean that's you got to be thinking through multiple layers and multiple channels, from influencers to who's the economic buyer to who's the ultimate beneficiary. This is like the ultimate B2B sale. Because you as a consumer, which means you're a patient, you're a loved one, and your family is the patient, and you're very directly paying for that. So people have ways of that. And I guess the reason I bring that up as an example is we're working really hard to try and, it's almost like a different version of segmentation across markets. Like who needs to know what, when, and who needs to be involved in the process when. And it might sound kind of complicated, but it's actually not. If you step down and think it through. By the way, I think that's another thing from a huge partnership that we've developed between sales and marketing. We've got all these joint teams now. It involves engineers, it involves the technology people, it involves that. Anyway, we're beginning to walk through these processes all the way to, okay, what do we do about lead generation, et cetera, et cetera. So it literally is from technically improving out to that. And I think if you do have that chasm or that kind of dark spot, it's probably time to fold up and go home.
George, one of the things you talked about is how things are so different with how buyers buy. And so buyers do spend a lot of time researching before they ever reach out. We see statistics that 60 to 70% of this research is done before they ever connect with the salesperson, which means sales has to sell significantly different. And I think that's unsettling for a lot of them. So how do you see that changing sales in a good way? And what's marketing's role in supporting a different type of a buyer's journey in sales?
I think when we do our best job in marketing, what we do is we give the sales force some material for the customers that the customers have never thought. So for example, about a year ago, we put out a study and we told the telecom service providers, you have a lot of customers at risk. And the reason is we are using more and more and more bandwidth, and we don't want to pay anymore. And as a result, the telecom service providers aren't putting the capacity in their networks to make sure you get a good video feed, to make sure you get good voice coverage, that your voicemail comes to you in time. Well, there's a gap in the mobile backhaul network, which is everything from the cell tower back into the phone network and the internet. And that gap is going to grow to 16 petabytes by the year 2017. 16 petabytes is 200 years worth of HD movies. So imagine all these users who are trying to download their HD movies and they're not getting anything. What are they going to do? They're going to churn to the competition. But by investing a little bit more in the fourth generation mobile networks, the LTE and LTE in advance, each dollar they put in over the usual threshold can save them $4 in business. So the business case is really good. When we came out and said it was controversial. We worked with an industry analyst to develop this point of view. Since then, we've shown them how they can apply technology, specifically software-defined networking, to start to close that gap. But you never want to let your customers have a bad experience when you could save $4 in revenue for $1 in expense. And that's the kind of level that we're taking an argument to, and then earning sales with them.
Yeah, I think if you think about how buyers are spending their time before they actually engage in a serious transaction conversation, I mean, it's a variety of ways, right? It's peer-to-peer discussions about experiences with those kinds of products and services. It's product reviews. It's content that's generated either by the manufacturer or the variety of manufacturers that are selling in that space. I think you have a whole portfolio of things that you need to be aware of and that you need to manage. And there are technology tools from a big data point of view that allows you to understand what kind of conversations are happening around those product areas, who are the influencers, who are the connectors of those conversations, and you have to pay attention to all of that. And to George's point, I think it also puts a much bigger burden on the quality of the products and services themselves, because we live in a very transparent world, and if you've got a product or service that's subpar, it's not going to be a secret. Everybody's going to know it. So it's kind of a combination, I think, of the bar being raised for companies delivering world-class products and services, and for the marketing organizations, comms organizations, and those companies to really understand what's the dialogue that's happening out there, how much of that dialogue can I influence, what kind of content can I develop that will help influence in a positive way how people are thinking about how products and services relative to others.
One quick thought to add on that. So if buyers are out looking, doing all the research ahead of time, they're obviously not doing all the research ahead of time, but they're in their minds, they're doing it. Why are they trying to do it? They're trying to minimize the risk. I think it's an excellent point that they brought up. So what can you do as a marketer to help work with a sales force to increase the confidence at the buyer? So we're all marketers here, something we've recently introduced on a limited basis, because it's culturally goes against, by the way, everything in GE. But who can tell me what a freemium business model is here? Right? Yes, sir. All right, what's a freemium business model?
I call it help you out close it for the marketing side. You give them good products if they're using it, and then you try to sell them later.
Yeah, you give them free products. In our case, it might be some software. We're big into software. That says this industrial internet things. I mean, we're getting big into software. So we're starting to put software in lots of things that mechanically have run for years, from power plants to hospitals to airlines to locomotives, railroads, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? You go to someone. I had lunch with someone a few months ago, and he's like, works for one of the big North American railroads, and he's telling me, he said, let me explain to you how I grew up. Okay, I'm a grease monkey. I probably still have grease under my fingernails from 36 years ago when I started there. And now you guys come in and you're talking about this big data, predictive analytics. He said, all I know is I need data. I don't even know where to look for it. So help me. So long story short on that is to convince the sales force to give this guy a free trial for 90 days. And in 90 days, we'll figure out what can this software do for you. Okay, and the answer was they came and told us. Of course, you have to then agree for access to the data, blah, blah, blah. They came and told us, oh my God, this is going to save us $14 million a month. Well, guess what? We closed that sale pretty quickly because of the free. Because the deal was, we'll give you the 90 days for free, but oh, by the way, they didn't even have to sign a contract, or we'll turn off the switch and go home. So the way you begin to think of these things is much more complicated. That there are new, there's a whole lot of new technology, but I'm not sure sometimes as marketers, sometimes we have this. I'll be guilty of this. I'll see how this is easier. You're all excited about the new technology and the new techniques. Sometimes some good old natured problem solving can come in and supplement that. So the technology is very high tech, but the sales process is like try before you buy or something. I think that's been around for a long time. And so, but you're just trying it in a new way with some new buyers. So that's a way maybe to help them get over the risk.
So one thing I see is that marketing talks about vision and where things can go for a company. So I want to know if this is either the case in your companies or with your clients. They're talking beyond what sales can actually sell and the rest of the company can actually deliver. So what happens is that marketing tells one story, sales tells another one to sell, and then here's the rest of the company caught trying to deliver something, and it ends up really affecting the customer experience. So talk a little bit about what needs to be done to create the right customer experience from marketing through sales, clear through delivery and customer retention. Maybe nobody wants to start with that.
That's a tough area. Howard should start.
This is why I love being on the board with Steve. I don't think the stories that are being told in the best companies from the best agencies are different. I think they're highly aligned. An example is we work with a client called Sunlight, and they sell employee benefits to companies, and it's kind of a low interest category, and it's a tough sell, and it's a very commoditized sell. And if you're a CFO or an HR person, you're looking at portfolio benefits for your employees, it's kind of been done down recently in price. We developed kind of a strategic campaign idea, which was, we needed to reawaken people's awareness of the benefit of benefits. And really, the benefit of benefits is protecting things that you love in your life, right? And then once we had that big idea, then we started thinking about, so how do we express that idea across each of the audience, the decision makers? Steve was talking about kind of the ecosystem of decision makers. So you've got consultants, you've got buyers, you've got influencers, you've got a variety of people. And how do you take that idea and start to drive it and get it through a content strategy and what I call it a value exchange strategy across a bunch of events that provided for engagement opportunities, all under that same banner that was then in turn embraced by the sales organization. And so the big idea lives all the way through the organization. I think certainly, Steve, when you think about GE's promise and purpose to the world, and we like to say, look, your products and services aren't the lead story. Your products and services are proof of your promise to the marketplace, right? So you need to have a very compelling, relevant promise to the marketplace where your products and services are the absolute demonstration that you really believe in that purpose. And then you get alignment from the organization. So I think where there is misalignment, you go through. And where there's alignment, I think you see more and more of it. Great companies like GE or IBM or Apple, you name 1,000 companies. It's happening.
I would say implicit in what Howard is saying is you can't undervalue the importance of leadership in this. So if you're the head of your firm, or if you're going into someone, and you're talking to senior management of the firm, you've got to have someone who believes in it. If you get the don't give me the vision thing, it's like again time to pack up your books and go, and go someplace else, because you've got to have people who believe in the mission that you're doing, and it's our job as marketers to make the connection from the vision right down to the tactics. So what I can tell you, at least what we try to do in our organization, is we focus on plans with the executive team, and we focus on execution with the specific business and the sales teams. And of course, we have to be the ones responsible to build that bridge. So if you're going, I mentioned like railroads before. If you're going to railroads, you got to talk to them about time of delivery and getting more goods to their customers cheaper and faster. So that's language that they can understand. How does that tie back to what we do? Well, we like to go out to the marketplace and talk about the challenges that with the tough challenges that we've been solving for 130 years. That's why our tagline these days is GE Works. So it has the connection, but the sales force doesn't care about that. The leader needs to support the connection to the vision, and I think the marketing team's got to do that piece, and then bring it all the way through to say, okay, now let's figure out in this market segment, what does it mean? What's the value that this customer's at?
I think you're talking about one of the biggest pain points that we feel anyway. When the customer's buying from you, they're buying more than a product. They're buying more than product and service or software solution. They're buying an idea. They're buying the idea that you're going to take care of them now and well into the future. When they buy equipment for telecom networks, it may be in their network for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Okay? So they want to see that you're looking down the road far enough that their investment's going to be protected. They have this huge asset base, and they're always trying to sweat more money out of it. So I had an episode in the last year where we went out with top executives' vision for software-defined networking. And we got beat up by sales because I don't have anything I can sell today. 2 months later, sales was screaming, I don't have enough material on that topic. So there's a pendulum swing. I would rather be ahead of it than behind it. I think when you're behind it, you can't ever regain position because you're perceived to be late to market. So there are things that you just have to talk about before you actually have a commercial offering. And then you talk about everything you can. You talk about the demo that you have. We put out a video of the demo so you can see that it works. Even before the product, you've got to start selling the idea. And there's always going to be a tension there, I think, between marketing and sales on this kind of issue.
So the next question, I think people think of this a lot in enterprise companies, big companies, and this is a problem, that marketing does one thing and kind of hands it off to sales, and then there's again that disconnect. And Steve, you talked a little bit earlier when we had conversation around this topic about the importance of cross-functional teams. So I'd like you to kind of kick this one off and also, again, talk about what it means in an enterprise setting, but also how important this is in small and medium-sized businesses too.
Yeah, to me, it's a universal need. It's just that in a bigger company, you get more specialists. I can tell you from a lot of the innovation work I do, specifically in GE, though, you find the unintended consequence of that is sometimes the bigger the team, the less focus you actually have. So think about that with some of the projects we work with. In fact, we've got a huge initiative inside GE right now, which is like if a project's important enough to do, you got to think of it like a startup and actually even fund it internally and staff it internally like a startup. And I don't know how many of you have ever funded and gone out to VCs or private equity to get your own money. And while I haven't, I've worked with tons of people who have. But the idea of someone going to a VC and saying, by the way, yes, I'm looking for money for you for this, but oh, by the way, I'm also working on 20 other startups I'm looking for money for. The odds of you getting any funding are like, zero, none. So focus is one of the aspects in this. To the comment I made before about the complexity of the world in terms of what the goods and services are you offer as well as the ways to deliver it, we just concluded you've got to be cross-functional. It doesn't mean everyone is dedicated, by the way, but you know who the team is. And in the case of developing the product, we're bringing in the technologists, we're bringing in the sales force early, we're involving the customer early. If you want a good book to read, go read the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It's a consultant who's done a ton of business with him. He's got one of the things he's got there is called an MVP, minimally viable product. How quickly can you get something that even resembles what you're thinking about in front of the customer? Okay, it could be software, it could be hardware, actually it could be a video brochure of what you're envisioning to say, would you be willing to buy this and how much would you actually pay for it? So it's not conceptual, you're trying to make it real. Well, you can't put that together without the right people to do that. And then if I come down, let's say, the execution curve, if you're trying to figure out how to get more leads in the pipeline, and you don't have someone from digital marketing who understands the nuances of doing this, oh, by the way, you don't have someone from IT who knows how to stitch it together so that it actually works. And then going forward, you're going to have to have people who understand how to, manipulate big data and things like this. I mean, if any one of you can tell me you could do all those things, I'd love to personally hire you. I don't think anybody can do it all. So the world of these cross-functional teams, to me, is going to become mission critical. How do you get the right resources at the right time from development of the concept all the way through? And I wish I could tell people, I hope there's a silver bullet to do it. I just think you got to have these cross-functional teams.
Yeah, I would pick up on what Steve is saying and say you have to have the minimum viable team. There are meetings that aren't worth having. If you have one key person or two key people missing, you're better off rescheduling a meeting. The way we actually hustle them into the room generally is with a deadline. It's like we've got to have this by this date because this trade show is going to happen. This deadline is going to hit. So we'll send something out that people have co-created. They've got a week to review it, but they've got to give all their input by the time of that call or meeting. And if they don't, they miss the boat. And once they miss the boat a time or two, they take that meeting a lot more seriously. But make sure in that meeting, before you pull out of the harbor, that you do have the minimum viable team there, because otherwise the decision won't stick. It'll come back.
Yeah, not a lot to add to either of those comments other than, one huge strength we're seeing is the amount of collaboration that's happening, not just in terms of cross-functional teams, but collaboration between what we do as an agency and what our clients are doing, and putting clients and agency teams together and solving problems together. And that's just way different than the world was 10 years ago, where the client would talk to the agency and give us a brief, and we go away and figure out it, and we lob something over the wall, and then we get something back with a lot of red lines through it. It's just a whole lot more fun, interesting, and inspiring to be sitting with super smart clients and hopefully some reasonably smart agency folks thinking about a business problem and working that problem, getting to places. And I think you get the better answers. I think you get the better buy-in. I think you get the learning is cumulative learning, and you also put better relationships.
So to ask a little more detail, so when we talk about what these cross-functional teams are, who are the people or the disciplines that you see on it for both agency and corporate? Talk about some of those titles.
My favorite meetings are with CEOs and CFOs and marketers in the room, and they don't have it often enough, but when it's a high-stakes kind of issue, they do have it. And then, Steve was talking about IT and the digital teams and the creative teams and the deployment teams and the social teams and the product teams. We live in a world where, we may all have too many meetings and there's not enough room on the calendar to do it, but, you're kind of, in a way, crowdsourcing the way you solve problems within the organization and across organizations. There's obviously individuals in every organization who are the big thinkers and the big drivers, so it's those folks. But the more disciplines you get in the same place at the same time, the better for you.
The big projects that we're doing, one we did earlier this week, we're planning for Mobile World Congress, which is the biggest show in the mobile industry. And we have the CEO there. That's a really important ingredient, so he could hear everything that was going on. The heads of the business units, the product marketers, and then the communicators and marketers are working on that, both internal and external. And the magic of that is that as you make changes, everybody understands why. Why are you saying it that way and not this way? Why are you not making that claim right now? Why are you saying it in a way that's going to make it sound and actually be more competitive compared to the other guys?
Got a couple of thoughts on how to do this. I spend more of my time these days being in this innovation role on product development. So in terms of who would I make sure is kind of like in there, I think the core team has got to have a product leader. Okay, who's the point person that says, I'm going to bed every night worrying about, is this thing actually going to get built and delivered, and do I understand what I'm doing it for? I think you have to have someone from finance in there. I think you have to have someone from technology/engineering in there. And it needs, I'd say, someone else to represent the other functions. Who are the other functions? Okay, legal, compliance, HR, depends upon, I think, your industry. But the one curve I want to throw in there to do is, anyone here ever actually worked on developing a modern jet engine?
A modern one?
Modern one, yes, as the ones that just flew on today. Well, neither I until a few months ago, but through a whole goofy thing, we're looking at 3D printing and how it can revolutionize what we do in manufacturing. I came up with this crazy idea with a couple of my colleagues that we were going to go crowdsource a part of a jet engine, and you can go search this and done a bunch of interviews on this. So long story short, we have 12,000 engineers, I'm not exaggerating, who work in GE Aviation. We found a 20-year-old college student in Indonesia who out-designed a piece of the jet engine to make it 80% lighter, which is going to save like $1 gazillion of fuel when it's got to testing and all that stuff. But it will be on airlines in a few years, mark my word. And how did we go do that? We found it through the crowd. We went out and did a crowdsourcing thing. And I was able to turn on the switch. In 6 weeks, we got 697 vetted, blueprint approved. It's got to be this big, this dimension, this size, this strength, made out of titanium, stuff I, by the way, none of which I understood, but I did the thing. And we paid this college student $7,000 for a multi-million-dollar idea. And by the way, everybody's thrilled. To be clear. So these cross-functional teams team. Nobody ever told us that. I don't know. So we'll talk about other drinks. But there's two reasons I'm bringing it up is, so who do you do this with? But the other reason I'm bringing it up is going forward for everyone in the room here. Okay, the barriers to entry and the way to get expertise is changing dramatically. So I think Howard brought up a great point about clients and agencies getting together in the room. That in and of itself is a revolution. But you can now virtually bring people into the room you'll never even meet who have this incredible amount of expertise. So I just think you gotta work that literally into your personal and your business models as you go forward.
Okay, we have just a couple of questions left, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So one thing I noticed is that it doesn't matter how much time or energy or thought or whatever marketing puts into this process. And I use my next door neighbor as the example because he is the absolute consummate salesperson. And he says, I am a point operated machine. And I'm not going to change anything I do if it affects my compensation. So it doesn't matter how good the intentions are of moving from product sales to solution or whatever else, is that if anything that marketing is trying to do will affect their compensation, then you'll never make any headway. And I think marketers don't understand that, and it's a big source of frustration. So does any one of you want to talk about that just a little bit as part of this equation? I guess Steve just volunteered Howard.
I was just doing it.
Oh, okay. So anybody who wants to answer, go ahead.
Incentives drive behavior, right? And sales is coin operated. And most of our guys in sales only have two metrics, two key performance indicators, which are revenue and bookings. And that's all they care about. They want to get the business booked, they want to get the revenue in-house, and then they get paid. But there are other people in the sales support organization, like sales system engineers and sales managers now that we incent, for example, to position the new product that we don't have this year, but we will have next year. And so they're starting to get a portion of their variable compensation based on that. That's really good for the business, and it's really important to help marketing get the next idea out there before the product can be delivered.
I think as we talk about all this like technology and how everything's changing, what doesn't change? Human nature doesn't change. I think that absolutely is an excellent point, and I'd say if marketers have like a couple of blind spots, this would absolutely be one of them. I can't tell you how many times earlier in my career I put together these, oh my God, incredible whiz-bang programs that at least impressed the heck out of me, and we weren't selling anything. And then at some point, you finally like, again, go on the sales call, and you'd be asking the guy or the gal in the crowd, well, what am I selling? Like, duh, you're not paying me enough. So if you don't adjust compensation, don't expect your new idea to get out there. I just don't think that people back's good at change. I mentioned a couple of times we're getting big into selling software on top of our hardware. And we've been having some pretty hard knockdown, drag-out conversations between let's say the old guard who says, oh, this is the way we do it, and new folks coming in saying, hey, the world of software is a whole different ballgame, and you're either going to pay up, pay for the sales in a different way, or you're not going to be selling. So I agree with the need to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, I think this is a super complex area, and I think this is an area where one size doesn't fit all, and it depends on the organization. So we're working with companies that are, manufacturing commodity products, and we're trying to decommoditize the commodity products that they're developing by helping them kind of see a path towards becoming innovation companies. In companies like that, we create kind of skunk works sales teams that are compensated differently to kind of develop proof of concept and leave the rest of the organization alone, because we're not going to change the rest of the organization to improve it. The organization by virtue of small teams doing things differently and ultimately hopefully better and more profitably. But it really, I think this is one where you gotta get alignment between how people are compensated and what you're asking them to do. But every company is different, and I think this is really, when it comes to compensation alignment and marketing and the sales organizations, there's a lot of bespoke kind of solutions as opposed to very common solutions.
Okay, and this is our last question, and it ties into the speaker for BMA Phoenix for next month. His name is John Miller. He's a co-founder of Marketo. So how does marketing automation fit into this? All of this you know, alignment between sales and marketing, and how do you involve sales in it? Do you give access to anything in the automation side for sales, or how do you handle that?
That's a tough one. It's becoming more and more prevalent. I'm actually going to follow up my comments with building off of what Howard said is you've got to be willing to experiment and change. It's absolutely true one size doesn't fit all. It's also equally true that you're not going to go change a battleship overnight just because you got a better idea. So, you know, automation and generating leads and, you know, whether it's you're doing it through Twitter or Facebook or Salesforce.com or anything, you got to like pilot and test and get this way. Having said that, we are slowly but surely converting a lot of people. You know, part of this, by the way, too, is it's what they call the cohort effect. Okay? It's going to be a lot tougher to get a 60-year-old trying it who's been selling for 30 or 40 years than it's going to take you a 25-year-old to sell it. But you know what? The 60-year-old probably has the relationships and has for years and years and years, and the 20-year-old uses the new technology. So how do you put that together? I think automation is a big piece of the future. I'll end with what I said before, is human nature is not going to change. So the idea of relationships are still going to be important, but the nature of them will probably change in terms of how you develop those relationships.
We don't let sales operate the marketing automation directly. We use okay. They don't like systems, right? They don't like filling in screens on a computer. They want to sell. They're coin operated. And but you know what's interesting is when they get a really good lead, it's intrigued them to see that Marketo is what we have. That you can pull out of Marketo, where has this customer been? What information did they look at? What white paper did they download? They're starting to get interested there. And I think it fits with the idea that a lot of the research is done before sales is contacted. So sales can have a window into what was that first stage in the buyer's process through the marketing automation. That intrigues them. They want to see that.
And I would only add to the marketing automation is a tool, not a solution per se, and it's got to be kind of integrated into all things that you're thinking about in the marketing program, and how to engage with customers. And you know, I think we live in the most fascinating time ever in marketing. There are so many choices, there are so many different channels. The complexity of the buying and selling processes is so great. And you know, one of the things that we're big believers that there are very few right answers. There are just a lot of better answers than other answers. And if you're looking for the silver bullet as to the right answer, you can go on a long search for a long time. And Steve's point earlier, you've got to be willing to experiment, you've got to be willing to take risks, you've got to be looking for the best answer in the circumstances that you have, in the organizations that you're working with. And I think that's a world that we all live.
Okay, so now we'll open it up for questions. Scott, do you want to say?
It's actually enable Q&A. So we're gonna feel free to ask everybody questions. And this is a great opportunity to see, so you can pass the mic around.
Who's got a question?
Can I ask you a question? Hi, I'm Kim Rosenberg. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for Matrix Medical Network, which is a healthcare IT company. And we've heard a lot today about crowdsourcing and minimally viable products and Salesforce. What do you see the role of marketing is in a changing environment where product requirements and market requirements are gathered very differently than they were maybe even 10 years ago? And how does marketing continue to have a role in that process?
Easy to answer, hard to do. The marketers, and I guess I believe this because this is what I do. Okay, if you're a good marketer and you hold your skill, you are, I'll use the word, uniquely qualified to pull all the needs together. Okay, you're not the expert, but by the way, you're not jack of all trades either. Okay, you're the person that says, do we have the right technology? Go find the technology people. Are we going to crowdsource this? Is legal been signed off? what's going on in terms of the product specs, what's the value, how are we going to define the value, are we going to do an MVP, whatever. And I just think marketing has to be working hard to train product managers who are going to be developing, let's say, healthcare equipment to be way, way, way more market backed in their thinking. And part of what we tell them is, you would never think to design a new product, at least a GE, without an engineer, because that's like where we all start from our genes. And we got to say, like, we're not saying not to do that, but man, you should never design a product without a marketer too. So we're looking to tie them intrinsically to the core team. If the core team is like 2 people, a marketer is one of the two people. And I think that you've got to rely on folks like us in our community to be your guideposts.
Hi, I have a question about the discussion you were having, compensation and the changing culture within these organizations. And statistically, it shows that employees are more aligned with the missions and the objectives, strategic objectives of companies when they feel appreciated, when they feel they've played a role within the company in achieving its goals. So do you see that kind of transition within that holistic, collaborative, changing work environment and the changing in the compensation category, because now we've got, inbound marketing and different people playing different roles in order to capture those leads in order to close the sale. So the salesperson isn't always the only individual that's responsible for the revenue. So how do you see that playing out as we move towards a more collaborative environment? How will that play out amongst the peers and the teams?
I think the sales force is okay with that as long as they get all the commission.
Sure.
There's a lot of ways that you can get people engaged in the process. At Telebs, we celebrate our patent winners, our inventors, and in our town halls where we have everybody in the company, they're either in the room or on a webcast. They get to talk about what they invented. They get some shares in the company. They get celebrated for the idea that they came up with, whether that idea ultimately made it into a product, yes or no. And there's other kinds of recognition. We also provide smaller things for who were the top bloggers last year. What were the most read white papers? So we take the time to celebrate those successes along the way so that more people feel included. And never underestimate the power of a handwritten note from the CEO. Never.
The other thing I would add is we're finding increasingly that, as we think through positioning and programs that are targeted to the internal audiences on a global basis are becoming so important. And we'll work with a company with 40,000 global employees who said, at the end of the day, if we do this right, you've got a 40,000 person media plan out in the marketplace, and everybody's thinking the same way, articulating the value proposition the same way, and frankly, is enthusiastic about the company and the products and services that represent. So, I think there's a big and growing move towards really investing in the culture of organizations and spending time really helping them understand what mission and purpose is. There's a great video on TikTok, you probably will see it, the Senate video about purpose-driven brands and why companies do what they do. You haven't seen it, you should see it. But that kind of stuff is incredibly powerful for the organizations. It should never be overlooked.
So few have it.
Sorry?
And many don't have it.
And many don't.
So the video Howard referred to is Simon Sinek. It's a TED Talk, and it's called Start With Why, and it's about 18 minutes, but it's really powerful. It's an 18-minute video rather than reading a book, which makes it a lot more efficient.
Another question.
I just want to run all the way over this way. And say, what's the role of analytics in marketing? How is that changing marketing and strength or weakness, or how do we come up with smart?
I think it's a strength. I think it tells us how to change our plays. The analytics that I use most frequently and robustly are for our website. And so we get a read on, what effect did that blog have on traffic? What's working right now? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? What's a successful and repeatable tactic that we've used? For example, putting a question on top of a white paper instead of an answer brings a lot more traffic from Google if it's the right question and exactly in the customer's words. So we use it to really fine tune what we're doing, what plane we're going to run.
You can't underestimate its importance in terms of it is the game changer that I think will define the generation going forward, because it's so pervasive. To me, the challenge is, and I'd say the other folks at GE, is trying to figure out how do you make sense out of all of it. Okay, you've all heard about the data tsunami and stuff like that. I mean, but it's true. Okay, so 10 years ago, our jet engine didn't have sensors on them. Okay, now you get 2 terabytes of data every hour off of a flight. An enormous amount of things you can do for safety and fuel efficiency and scheduling and all that stuff, but no one knows what to do with it yet. So how are you going to do that? And the same thing with, the websites and the leads and who's reading what, and it's a great thing that, you guys are going to be hearing from Marketo, but, so big data is end-to-end now, from the product all the way through to the sale. I'm not sure we've got it figured out at all. How we're building it.
It's feet to the fire, right? So, I think it's just by definition a great thing, because it assumes accountability and it assumes that we're going to actually measure what we do. I think the big thing to deal with is what do we measure? What are we measuring that's useful versus what are we measuring that's less useful? So we simplify things a lot. We've kind of looked at analytics in 3 buckets for now. We need to change 3 years from now. But we look at program analytics in terms of the kinds of marketing programs that we're implementing, and from the site point of view, and visit point of view, what's driving visits and how much time are people spending on pages and all that kind of stuff. That's really about the program efficacy, and then we're looking at brand analytics, which are kind of the traditional ADU analytics, and then we're working with clients on business analytics. We're saying, what are business goals? And how can we, and that has to be collaborative with the client, and how can we together develop dashboards that will help us understand how we're actually driving the business forward, whether that's revenue, whether that's leads, whether that's extending the lifetime value of a customer, a whole variety of things, and really customizing it for their clients.
We have time for another question?
Absolutely.
Okay, one last question.
You touched on this a little bit, but and I'm asking this not from I'm not in sales or marketing, I'm on the market research side, so I do a lot of competitive research and market analysis. And of course, social media has drastically changed marketing in the last few years, and you've touched on a little bit of how it's affected sales teams and such. But I'm amazed when I use social media for research how much information I can find out about companies, sometimes from salespeople tweeting certain things or writing something on Facebook. So I guess my basic question is, from the purpose of what's out there as far as information, what are you seeing, or what do you have in your own companies as far as rules or guidelines about what the sales force can and cannot do in social media?
Our rule is don't be stupid.
We have a whole policy, and we do a class to bring people up to speed. It's basically, don't do anything that you wouldn't do in a human-to-human interaction. Be human. Don't trash people. Don't overreact. Don't pretend you have all the answers. Just common sense things. The Air Force has a really good decision chart that we use about whether we're going to respond to a post, whether we're going to refute a wrong fact, which generally we do. Are we going to get into an argument? Generally we don't. If we have a former customer who's looking for software and they don't have a support agreement, are we going to help them out? So those we do on a case-by-case basis, really to try to do the right thing for the customer and for the business.
we try and go to every single department and say you need a designated communicator. You gotta have someone who can speak. So there's the what I might be saying or searching. Let's say it's okay for anyone in sales now to go search in LinkedIn, but in terms of someone who might post something on Facebook on the GE page or GE reports, as we call it, we got our own sources. That's supposed to come from anything. But and it's like, I mean, I've never seen anything evolve more quickly. We had an exec 4 years ago who basically said, I'll be damned if we're going to open up all the GE offices so you can even get on the internet outside of GE. And we're not going to have, and was putting together a policy that said you could not join LinkedIn if you work for GE. Until I called up the CMO of LinkedIn and found out that there were already 75,000 GE employees signed up. So this policy might be out of date already. So, and it continues to fall. I mean, think about yourself. I mean, I don't know about you, but the first time anyone told me about LinkedIn, it was because what a great way to search for jobs. And our sales force felt threatened if they got on LinkedIn. And now we're building programs every single day with, obviously LinkedIn and Salesforce and everything else. So it's, I'm not sure everyone knows where it's going, but you got, I like the don't be dumb comment.
We got time for a couple more. Okay. You guys want to say
when I worked for a large corporation, there was an ego and a turf problem between sales and marketing. Yeah. And I'm wondering how much of the problems that exist today are because of that. That there's, one of the things is sales is the biggest customer in marketing. So if sales doesn't do its job, nobody gets paid, as one of you said. But sometimes the people in marketing say, oh, those salespeople, they don't like them, they don't like their personalities, they don't like it. But that's the person who brings in the money. So if you don't treat that person like your customer, that organization like your customer, you're in trouble. And I've seen that in several large corporations. What I want to know is that still going on?
I've heard of it. Wait, I mean, in GE, you're not going to survive in marketing with sales. And a lot of it has to do is that we're not, I grew up with Kraft and Pepsi, so as a recovering consumer marketer, it's a whole different world. Okay, we ran the show when I was growing up, and sales kind of had to follow marketers' beat. If we said we're doing a big promotion on whatever, that was the big promotion. But we sell in our case, multi-million-dollar deals all the time. The marketers need to understand that they've got to work with sales. And I tell people get over it. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't have a spectacular career and a huge impact. But you got to recognize that if they don't do the sales, we don't have no jobs.
I also think some industries, I mean, you look at professional service industries and big manufacturing industries and now software industries like Steve's involved in. To me, in my experience on the agency side, they're a lot more fast forward with getting that linkage. There are other categories, and I don't want to offend anybody, but we work in financial services a lot. We talk to an investment banker about communications. That's a long conversation. And so, I have a flat spot in front of my head in those conversations. So, I think some industries are more prone because they see it more clearly, and others a little less so. But I think generally the trend is towards that coming together. And I also think, the biggest influencer around the idea of sales and marketing coming together is the CEO of the company, regardless of the category. And the more visionary the CEO, I think the quicker you get to organizations and understand that they need to become cohesive and they need to be integrated.
My question is somewhat similar with a little bit of a twist. My experience has always been that B2B organizations have two tables: finance, operations, IT, sales are at one table, marketing is at the kids' table. And growing up in that environment, with the advent of technology, the advent of marketing automation, all the different things that you guys have talked about already, how is marketing viewed in your companies and suggestions you may have to get marketing at the adult table?
I think the way you get there is by delivering the goods. About 3-4 years ago, we accepted revenue quotas. So we, I had a discussion with the CEO and the head of sales. It's like, I want to create this position for demand generation. It's okay. You've got to produce X amount of revenue in a year. And by the time we got to the end of 2 years, we had produced 3X. So I think that's the way you finally make it.
Totally agree. You got to add value. You can't ask, certainly can't demand to go from the kids' table to the grown-up table. And when I joined GE, I'd have lots and lots of people to come in and say, how come I'm not in that big important meeting? I said, well, what have you done to add value? So it's if you add the value, if you work your way in, if you deliver the programs, you're going to have a manager who would never think of doing a big initiative without a market.
Just got one more over here. We got just a couple minutes.
I was curious what you use for your leading indicators and performance measures against successful use of social media and collaboration.
I think leading indicators on social is just how engaged the social interaction is. It's not about likes per se or hits per se. It's how engaged those people are, how much time they spend, how interested they are in developing indices around that. And it's a new world and it's evolving really quickly. And I think we're in the early days, right? But that said, there's no doubt in the world. I think I read a full news story on the plane coming out that the Apple store on 5th Avenue and 57th Street apparently collapsed. It's been a structure from all the snow. And there's a gazillion tweets saying the glass crashed just like they do on their phones. And so I think someone at Apple has some work to do from a social point of view. And how do you manage that conversation?
The first thing we look at is reach, and the main thing that we did there is to get our employees involved. We looked at all the employees who had more than 500 connections on LinkedIn, and we designated them LinkedIn ambassadors and invited them to post content that we provide. So regularly, at least 6 times a week, we offer up content that they can choose to post to their audience, yes or no. And what we found is that this increases our reach 2x, 3x for each post. And it makes them feel like they can do something to move the ball ahead. I think this goes back to the recognition question earlier. Let them touch the ball. Let them help move it along and see that people are interacting.
So I actually had a couple of questions. I'm just going to be up here real fast before we break. Number one, we talked about big data analytics. How often are you guys meeting with CIO? What are those meetings usually? What kind of conversations are those?
We back to the cross-functional discussions we had before, and we're basically not doing meetings anymore without literally the CIO or high up people involved in whatever the project has to be. And that is end-to-end. That's from the brand new product development all the way through to the social media to be able to get it out there. That comes like my boss doesn't talk around like marketing used to marry IT, because you can't do marketing anymore without IT.
We're fortunate in our department. We have a couple of people with IT skills that are on my staff, and so those guys, we talk every day. There is an IT governance board, and that's a regular monthly meeting, and then we meet as needed with any special project.
So, we look at it a little bit differently, and we're building technology tools to help us manage and understand big data in such a way that we can help our clients in a more relevant way. It's mostly about conversations, influence, distributors of that content, and understanding, who are the most important people in certain categories, what are they saying, who's distributing their content, how do we intersect with them. So, it's as an agency, we're becoming a technology company, and that's interesting. And as a business, it's interesting to kind of worry about
Thank you, guys. Guys, we have a quick round of applause for all. Carl, for doing an amazing job, and our moderator, for everybody getting up here. Our doors are opening in the back. Thank you to Prisma, our sponsor today. Everybody should have a couple of drink tickets. We're going to have a networking reception in the back. So yeah, thank you for Prisma. You don't clap. For his first event of the year. This is an amazing turnout. I think we're the best BMA have ever seen here at Phoenix. We're going to keep on doing this, so we'd love to see you next time. And before